So, Starfield is about space. No, wait, hear me out, I know what you're thinking. But this is a sprawling science fiction epic that sets you loose among the stars to define your own path on a macro and micro level. Starfield, more than any other Bethesda title before it possibly, is about the player's expansion and retraction of their own play space. Across the seemingly endless hours you could pour into it, Starfield gives space. Space to traverse, space to ignore, space to be yourself, space to be someone else, space to simply be. The things it chooses to put in this space land with dramatically varying degrees of success, and the game being both the studio's most polished work to date and home to some of its weaker choices. And yet, that enigmatic space, that void, called to me all the same. Not unlike an intergalactic engine slowly whirring to life, Starfield takes some time to truly make its jump. Bethesda's introductory missions have always been a little clunky, often tasked with rapidly onboarding you to its latest fantastical setting through some contrived set of tutorials and exposition, and Starfield certainly sets a record here. Beginning life on a backwater mining planet in the employ of one of the galaxy's unsavory corporations, your humdrum life is upended when you uncover a strange metallic object buried deep in the planet. This artifact, as you'll come to know them, is the first of Starfield's many genre shortcuts, a metaphysical object that points you to the stars in search of something greater than yourself, likely left behind by some unknown advanced alien race. It's not cheap as such, but it is remarkably unremarkable as far as calls to adventure go, especially in this genre. Like most Bethesda games, Starfield is ostensibly about the freedom to choose your own path. Like those introductory missions though, I've always found this to be a somewhat clumsy promise from this developer, these games often locking essential mechanics behind the core path. Skyrim is huge for example, but my opening hours always saw me running those exact same few quests until I could get the shouts, begrudgingly nodding along with that game's dreary self-seriousness until it would let me use my voice to upset every dining table in the realm. Starfield also bundles many of the game's best mechanics into its main questline, but finally finds a way to make that path to them feel genuinely compelling, or at least easily ignored. Constellation, the game's main faction and player benefactor, drops the portent and instead offers you a home among a group of well-meaning, mismatched dorks. Constellation's only defining trait is its pursuit of knowledge, specifically whether the artifacts can offer humanity. This is Starfield's way of fast-tracking you to your very own ship and crew, as Constellation is largely happy for you to do your own thing out in the galaxy, provided you eventually come home and drop off whatever artifacts you find along the way. Starfield giving the ability to organically shift between role-playing styles as I came and went from Constellation was genuinely quite liberating. The dubious shit that I did in the far reaches of space to impress a far-off crime syndicate, that mattered little to Constellation. This isn't freedom from consequences, mind you, the rest of the galaxy will definitely still notice you, but Constellation's indifference is both baked into the writing of the faction itself and a very generous rope that Bethesda gladly feeds to you. Much ado has been made about Starfield's 1,000-odd planets, scattered across dozens of star systems to explore to your heart's content. It was always a bold premise, right? Especially for a studio that earned its place designing large, but inherently limited play spaces. The transition to freeform galactic roaming is about as wobbly as you could expect them. An oddly constructed series of emotionally resonant highs and plodding mechanical lows, Starfield's space is primarily navigated via menus. Almost everything you do through Starfield is done by drilling through UI elements. The massive galactic map offers an array of systems to jump between provided your fuel can handle the trip, but you're just as likely to skip that screen entirely by holding X on a quest log and fast traveling light years in mere seconds, regardless of your fuel or proximity to goal. It brutally compacts the scale in service of ease of use, a compromise that I can definitely appreciate, but I can't quite square away with the game's overriding thesis. Your path through the stars is carved by your ship, of course, a fully customizable, battle-ready houseboat of a machine that Bethesda has smartly made an almost entirely optional mechanic. Constellation will give you a free ship to kick things off, with more than enough room to recruit a whole host of NPCs as your crew, and the basics of ship travel and combat covered. Jumping into a system puts you in orbit over a planet of your choosing, and gives you a contained area to fly around in, engaging in dogfights and chance encounters with passing ships. There's a decent sense of heft to these spaces, your ship moving markedly differently depending on its build, and the thrill of seeing something that you've spent hard-earned credits on tearing through an asteroid belt and foes alike never really gets old. Depending on how you've allocated the resources that you can gather and mine throughout the galaxy, you can basically build your ship into whatever space fantasy you desire. The game's NASA Punk, a genuinely awful name for its subgenre it's trying to create, I'm sorry, I just had to get that out. Anyway, that NASA Punk, quote-unquote, aesthetic and technology means that you're never going to build a sleek machine, but by the endgame I had managed to strip my ship down to its basic components to better optimize maneuverability and aggression. Dogfighting is likewise rarely ever sleek, but again, that heft among the stars adds a nice layer of physicality to those collisions. You can real-time adjust your engine's distribution between several systems, bolstering things like shields and lasers or boosters and jump drive depending on your needs in any given situation. Still, the limitations of space creep back in, as you're fairly restricted out here too. You can't actually fly to another planet's orbit. You can't align your ship to dock into something. You can't breach an atmosphere. Again, all of this is done through sub-menus and those hard loading screens. Once you've got boots on the ground though, Starfield opens up in fascinating and largely successful ways. Bethesda's penchant for considered and inviting play spaces roars to life here. The handful of big name locations and planets that I visited, each offering a pretty unique twist on sci-fi genre staples. The verdant green and clean silver of the core worlds, the grimy back streets and neon lit bars of the Outer Rim, the dilapidated research facilities and colossal floating cities in the stars. It all just works, Todd. Rarely ever surprising, but delighting me all the same. More times than I can count, I would find myself content to just roam around these spaces, constantly impressed by how layered they often were, exploration almost always yielding a new nook for me to plunder or an NPC for me to observe and have a chinwag with. The procedurally generated worlds, which make up the bulk of Starfield's marketed planet diversity, are far less compelling though. There's a strangeness at the core of these spaces, the game's design clearly leaning into the barren and empty nature of semi-realistic space exploration as like a base ethos, but subsequently populating these spaces with automated content. One mission tasked me with building a secure base of operations on a remote world of my choosing, so I charted a course to a distant system, found an aesthetically pleasing but empty world and used the orbital view of the planet to pick a spot just by the water. Upon landing though, Starfield populated the surrounding area with an array of things to do, one of which was a fully operational mining outpost flooded with goons. It's immediately immersion breaking and a greater hurdle to overcome than the sometimes pleasant but often dreary landscapes that the game auto-generates. These spaces can also play host to a settlement of your own design, which is an extension of Fallout 4's base building that, much like the ship customization, is actually entirely optional. Lessons learned from previous attempts at this system mean that the control is pretty good, offering a clean camera overview of your structure and a myriad options of aesthetic, defenses, and utilities. But when the authored spaces are as compelling and sprawling as Starfield's, I never really felt the need to call any one planet home. Instead, I made peace with my ship being my only true constant in the galaxy, and Starfield let me without so much as a blink. That both of these systems are as robust and optional as the other is a small wonder, Bethesda deploying a tremendous degree of trust in the player to define this experience for themselves. That trust in the player ripples through Starfield's quest design too, as Bethesda veers away from Fallout 4's action-heavy leanings and returns to its good, talky RPG roots. There is a lot of dialogue in Starfield. Character conversations always running much deeper than you're expecting if you're willing to put the time in. I'd been traveling with one of my companions for hours before he revealed that he'd once been married and lost his husband during a war, information that in turn unlocked a whole new world of opportunities between us, if you know what I mean. You'll still find your fair share of humdrum archetypes in the galaxy, but solid voice work tends to elevate most of it, and if someone's vibe really hits you wrong, you can always rob them or worse. That said, I did have these grand designs on being a cruel bounty hunter, and while the game would actually let me do those things, the strength of its character writing and the tone of its world always pulled me away from the cartoonishly evil and convinced me that, hey, you should care about these people, even if just a little bit. That investment in the worlds of Starfield often pays off in surprising ways during the game's quests. Constellation's effort to collect the artifacts yields both compelling story moments and a revolving door of planet-hopping fetch quests to complete at your leisure. The hunt for artifacts will take you to most corners of the galaxy, and in turn expose you to countless new quests, some organically flowing from your choices and some only found by exploring and asking the right questions. There's also a litany of busy work to do if you want some low-stakes adventuring, passive conversations in the world constantly adding leads to your quest log that you can follow or ignore depending on your mood. By the time I hit credits, I had pages of quests left to do, most of them emerging along the path of a previous quest that I had assumed was actually just going to be a quick one, but it had indeed backdoored me into a whole other subplot. It all locks into place to be both inviting and very easy to lose yourself in. Starfield is still a hostile place though. Humanity's voyage into the stars marred with war, capitalism, and plunder. The NASA core, which I am absolutely taking back from Bethesda and renaming, aesthetic informs most of Starfield's technology and design work, its sci-fi setting almost always grounded in tactility and unassuming machinery. It's not the most exciting art direction, but it is oddly appropriate and textually relevant too in some genuinely cool ways that I cannot talk about yet. The adversity of these worlds is softened by stunning skyboxes and charming characters, but you'll still need to get comfortable with violence eventually. Starfield offers a diverse arsenal of weaponry and tricks to deploy in combat, all of which look and sound great, but often lack a satisfying punch. The combination of old world gun design and futuristic leanings makes for a really great pair, but enemies take far too much punishment sometimes, and player feedback is far too little. There's an arcadey fun factor to this lightweight combat that does often offset the flimsy feel, but given how much you are going to be in combat, I really would have liked to have seen a marked improvement over previous titles. Your proficiency with weapons can be improved through the game's skill tree, which mitigates the damage issue somewhat, but no matter how much harder you hit, guns never really feel like the best option in Starfield. Outside of specific side quests and key moments though, you can often avoid combat if you spec your character in just the right way. Starfield has sort of a build-less approach to role-playing, instead allowing you to freeform control over the game's skill tree's various paths into specialized abilities, including physical, social, combat, tech, and science. Within these trees, you must complete certain requirements to upgrade skills, like killing 10 people with a pistol for a pistol upgrade, for example. You can mix and match, but certain skills surrounding things like ship control, baseline health, and planet traversal tools feel genuinely essential to the experience here, and every time I had to spend points to upgrade into those paths, it did feel as if I was taking away from the role-playing potential of the game. Starfield space and how it uses it is never cleanly defined. A game as clumsy as it is charming, as fiddly as it is intuitive, as banal as it is inspired, Starfield is many things at once, its competing ideas and mechanics hanging together by vibes and a dream. For all my criticism, it's undeniable how much Starfield captured my imagination, and even now all I want to do is jump back into my ship and head back out there. Bethesda's signature magic has been scattered across the stars here, its light swallowed by some far-reaching recesses, but also finding thrilling new ways to refract through space.